because I know I said I'm a snowball modeler, but I usually have an idea of what I want to do, and it starts with a sketch. So the Scorpion was a rebuild of a kit that I never finished, that I started building with my next door neighbor, Timmy Mulligan. His mom bought him the Scorpion and said, help Timmy build this. We didn't know what we were doing. We painted everything and then tried to glue it together. So tester's paint and tester's glue, they work great in one order, but not the one we tried. So we eventually gave up and it went in the parts box. And the little red injector lines floated around in my parts box for years. And I would always remember, I never finished that. And then I think there was a contest online, and I thought, I want to do the Scorpion. I want to go after that one again. And so I found one on eBay, paid a pretty good amount of money for it because they were pretty rare. And again, it was going to be box stock. And when I mocked it up, I went, well, that doesn't look very good. It's typically a lower, skinnier car. And it's odd, and it sits high off the ground. It's squishy like this one. So, okay, let's start changing things around. And so I looked at the box art. I'm like, well, it looks shorter because, they took liberties because it was drawn. I go, so I'm going to shorten it. So I moved the rear wheels forward and I moved the front wheels forward and I shortened it a bit. So then the chassis, the Piranha chassis that's under there, that's easy because it's stuck out. So you just shorten that and everything lined up. I used the Piranha engine. I had to make my own headers because the headers that didn't work. Basically, they don't fit the kit. And I changed the roof line. I changed the body. I wedged it out. And I was pretty deep into the build by the time I did that. And then I shortened the chassis. And then I just went to town on a chassis. And this is where I tried the engine turn bare metal foil. And it didn't work. So I just used brushed metal foil. And it's okay if you brush it because everything's going the same way. So you don't have those right angles that'll get brittle. And I do that a lot now. And then I turned all the plastic parts into metal parts. And I learned my hand at making things out of metal. The steering wheel poses, the tires pose. And then, one night I'm sitting there thinking about it, trying to fall asleep. And I go, if he wrecks, the imaginary guy driving this, he's going to be stuck in there because there's functioning hood pins that hold it down. And that's dangerous. So I made a little escape hatch. And then I felt better about it.
That's the kind of things that we consider as adults. Let's make this safe.
Yeah, And my wife goes, oh, so your little man will be okay if he wrecks. Yes, he will. So I wanted to do some model car magazine writing. And I offered it up to Harry and Greg. And they said, yeah, sure, send us some stuff. But I'd already done a couple things where how to make moon disc, I think was the first one I did, out of the bottom of a pop can. And you can make them any size you want. And so I did that. And then I thought, hey, I'm doing a bunch of different techniques on this car. Can we use this to keep doing scratch build? And Harry used it for scratch building school. And it took 2 years to finish it. And you go through the trials of figuring out the paint, of making your own windshields, of all sorts of stuff,
Making that windshield was such a great solution because I've used that technique in the past where you heat plastic over a candle. I would always go and I get the hobby shop stuff and I'd be so particular and it has to be this stuff, just getting it all like, okay, I can only use the squadron stuff. But you used a shirt collar.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wouldn't that be perfect? I could just use a shirt collar and not go nuts trying to find some plastic that doesn't exist anymore.
Really, any clear piece of plastic, I examine it to make sure there's no bubbles in it. And if it's good, I cut it out and I put it in my stash. Because bigger is better because you can get a grip on it. And really, the cool part about that is now you can make any windshield you want without a vacuum form. Now, if you were trying to get it to suck down in crevices, you're going to need a vacuum form. I do 5 or 6, cut them out, until I get one that fits nice and just work your way to it. And it worked well. In fact, this one is so thick, that shirt collar, that I inset screw heads to show that it was screwed into the body. And it takes tint. To me, it takes it. In fact, this windshield was made the same way. So is this windshield, and it's like a 30-minute project and you've got a windshield.
Perfect solution.
Easy solutions.
And like you said, when you're making them, you might make 4 or 5 or 6 of them and then
Right.
choose the perfect one.
Exactly. And, if you can, so if you add bolt head detail to your models and you need 4 bolt heads that you're cutting from, or you're photo etch, or you're cutting them from a hexagon bar, I'm going to have 8 because they're going to go away, and then I can pick the ones that are the right level, so I'm not going up and down, up and down. And that way, if you lose one, you're not stopping and, you're never going to find it. So you just grab the next one. This one, the seat belts. So the Detail Master seat belts, you see people, they're like, how do you do that? It's so hard. And Mark Jones was the one who told me the trick. He goes, you don't need to feed it all the way through. Mm-hmm. He goes, on the one, you just tuck it underneath up against it. And because otherwise you're trying to put 2 layers of that material and it's just impossible because just cut it and tuck it, a little knife edge on it. Tuck it in there. No one will ever know. Yeah, Mark Jones is phenomenal. And he's just like all the rest of them. He'll share, how I did this. Like, see that steering wheel? That's got real wood handles. The way I knew how to do it was from, is his name Bill Cunningham? He's a GSL winner. And he told me, him and Randy Deere told me, and he goes, what you do is, he goes, making a steering wheel, a wood steering wheel, he goes, you make it bigger. You put it together and then start sanding it. And you can bring it down to that fine shape without having to try and manipulate these little things and get it to line up. I'm like, oh God, I use that technique all the time. It's like that's so simple, but he's a master model. He knew the trick.
Comes with experience.
Yeah. Sometimes people tell you, sometimes you stumble on it. One of the last things I would say, you can't even see it, but there's a custom-made moon tank in the back, and it's got welds on it. And that was one I figured out because my dad had a muffler shop. So I understood the principle of welding. It's metal, so it needs to look like it's been joined together. I figured out that if I take, to me, a 2-part putty, and I roll it really thin into a tiny thing, and then I line a little bit of, I'm going to say epoxy, I forget, and I just get a thing and I start welding. And I go all the way around whatever I'm doing, and with a little pin shaped the right way, and you can make a bead. And I've seen other people do it with, was it Randy Dare that was talking?
Yeah, on his 12-scale Corvette.
He used, and
that green
softened it
Corvette.
up. But, and that's the stuff where it's fun, and you got beads. And I think the hood pins, the functioning hood pins, I had to figure that one out. You got to bend them the right way. You got to wrap it around something and bend it with the right kink and find the right wire. But drilling a hole in the side of a rod, that was the hard part. How am I going to do that? And I failed, off to the side, crooked off to the side. I'm like, how am I going to do that? And then I figured it out. You take a drill bit that's the same diameter as the rod, and then you trap the rod in your tweezers. And so they're both at the same, they're stuck. So then, and of course you leave room on the end. You don't try and get to the end. You can cut that off later. Make it big, start big, make it small. And then you can do a hole, a starter hole with the bigger drill bit. Then you go to the little drill bit and you've got a perfectly centered starter hole on the side of a rod. And so it drops right down.
Oh, that's
Give
gorgeous.
It a bump, and they pop right through. I mean, they are tight. And I could get these pins to go right through that little hole and secure it in, but I don't do that very much because it's a lot of work. And you were talking about not giving up. I dropped this. Right when I was putting the final paint on the body, I dropped that chassis and it broke. So after a little moment of, I don't know how you feel, but it's pretty bad. I'm like, all right, let's see what we can do to put it back together.
That's the good, healthy attitude. Move forward.
Yeah, move forward. Let's see. We can fix it. There is a thing that I did a couple times with the model club friends of mine. It's called the Rat Plastic Thrash. And we all bring our box of parts, and you have one color primer and one color metallizer, and that's it. And glue, lots of CA glue. You build a model in a day. Now, I only got one done, but everybody else would get 2 or 3. This is the one that's left over from the last one we did. So this was a resin body, a front end of a pickup, and then I used the bed to fill in the holes because the body was a drag car. And it was fun. And they ragged me because they said too much detail.
Oh, gee, you spent an entire day.
And it was so fun, and they put out like 4 each. And my son Kyle was there and he put out a couple. That is a fun thing to do.
So this was, in essence, a group build with
Yeah.
everyone sitting around tables
Yes.
together?
Yes. And it's
watching everyone else build.
Yeah, and talking model cars, having pizza. Yeah. It was super fun. The first one came from the group out of the Coffin Corner. I don't know if you know that site. But the SoCal guys got together and we just knocked out models, and it was fun.
I think to sit together and just see how different modelers hold a file or how they cut something with a razor saw. There's a lot to learn that's very subtle. There's a lot to learn there. Bob Pace in 2003 at GSL, when he did his hot knife demo, he was there and he would sand it with a Dremel. And he would hold it like this in the Dremel, and he would be using his sides to cut it. And it was very stable in doing the whole thing. And it was like, I'm like, that bit is just 4 inches from your aorta. It just seems really dangerous. But everyone in the audience decided, you know what? We all hold it the same way, because it's such a solitary thing when we build. When we get together, we realize what we have that's similar in the way we hold things and how dangerous it can be.
Oh, yeah. I did that with that razor saw, that photo etch saw. Yeah, I got into my finger one. So I know. But you talked about something that's super important, is tool technique, where you were talking about how he holds the thing, how to file. It's something you got to look at someone do it. And, there's some of these guys on the YouTube now that are phenomenal modelers. And that's one of the things I always watch is look how they file. How are they getting their cuts so straight and square? And it's because they're not doing this, they're doing this, And it's little things like that you're like, that's how they do it. How to cut a tube square, when you cut it and you start making threads. And I'm like, how do you do that? And I'm watching it. You go one direction. And then you get back in the groove. You keep going till that groove is deep.
It's a good, long, straight cut. Yeah, and I have a tendency to use my thumb or a finger as a guide to help line it up. So, of course, after I've done a lot of filing, I have it like a notch out of my thumbnail.
I know what you're. So, if you want to take and move a little bit of a ledge into something, right? So you're going to put your finger here and then start filing so it drops down at your thumb, right? I just started doing that just now. I'm like, that works. And then scraping. I didn't realize how effective scraping can be for making small modifications and lining things up. If you've seen these guys where they just... It's amazing. You were talking about to be able to sit with someone and watch how they do it. YouTube does that for me. Like, you find a modeler that's building and you watch what they do. Oh, yeah. I'm like all the time, oh, that's how you do that. It's pretty fun. That's a new way to do it, I guess, if you can't be in person. Yeah. YouTube has brought us together as modelers.
Hey, what was the first show? The first time you went and saw a room full of models?
N&L West. I remember it so well. First off, I'd never been, and me and my friend Tim Lance are going. We're both in this the SAM Model Car Club. It's shut down now, but it was a really good group of guys. And we did a newsletter. I actually did their newsletter for him. So Tim drove, and he would wake me up because I was falling asleep in the car. He goes, "Which way do I go?" Because there was nothing then. You used a map. That way, back asleep. So that was such an experience to see. 2 things happened. One, I'm like, look at these guys, because you got Roy Stearns, you got all those NorCal modelers. And I'm like, I know that guy because I started getting magazines. And so I started learning about all these people building models. And that's Mark Townsend, my buddy from the club. He goes, go talk to him. I'm like, oh, no, just go talk to him. And I'm like, hi, and I just said, I really like your stuff. And he had his Sportster out. He had the Butter Dish out. All these models I'd seen in magazines. And he was the nicest guy. And what I learned was they're all nice. And everybody wants to talk about their stuff. He showed me the welding technique without your spin on it, where you can also do body work. He was just blending panels. And he showed me, this is what you do. And so I used that technique to do some major body work on a 51 Chevy. And it still stuck together to now. But just getting to talk to everybody, getting to look at all this stuff. Eventually you're going to meet people that are heroes. You know, you're going to run into, like, you know who Ira Dunham is?
I know the name.
Okay, so he's an OG, and he's the guy who I how do you want to say? I can't say he taught me scratch building, but he did. He's the first one I watched build a body on his Moon Cube series, and it was this little pyramid shaped body on a trike, and I just thought that was the coolest thing.
Yeah, he is prolific.
Yes, and he's so creative. Again, you know, he goes outside the box.
Yeah.
There was never a box for Ira unless he built it himself. You know, and again, super nice guy. And you go, oh my gosh, you know, I'd sign my thing. You're Ira. You know, I would never imagine I'd meet him. What was your first show? So you built by yourself. How'd you get to your first show?
My first actual real show was NNL East #3.
How did you know to go to that show?
Scale Auto Enthusiast, you know, the magazine that was so important to us into the older, more adult years, reading that and realizing that there were other builders. And in the back, there was a little classified ad that said, call John Solosky. He's having a show in New Jersey, and called the number. And John said, well, come on out. So I did, living in New York City at the time.
Wow.
Then it was a small show in the rec room of a church, and I met people there that I'm still friends with today. I was amazed that there were just all these adults that had the same crazy interests that I did. I have rediscovered a car that you built long ago, the Uncertain C.
That's this one. Surprisingly, this car, I built it the way I planned to build it. I knew what I wanted to do. The level of detail popped up higher. I started with the drawing. I wanted to use the Patera suspension on the back because I always thought it was beautiful, that independent suspension, and I wanted to highlight it. And I wanted a C cab. Now, at the time, I did not have an Uncertain T to use to cannibalize, and maybe that's for the best. But a friend of mine, Jeff Miller, did. And so he just sent me the dimensions of the roof and the back. And we talked about it, and he's like, look, it's flat panels, and you just have this one beveled curve right here. And he says, and then we, you know, get some tube, and then you can work it into a V, and that's how you can do that. And so sure enough, I was able to create a body. And I think my roof is a little wider at the front than a regular one. And I even narrowed it once because I was like, it's too wide. And he's just, you know, talking to your friends. Jeff's like, sand it down and then move this part in. Oh, okay. And then getting the curve, I learned that you have to score it to get it to really set in there because it was popping up. It's just a fun car. I really like it. I've always liked the Uncertain T because it is so over the top. And I thought, well, now we have a C. And, it, you know, you just got to place it, get it lined up right. These tires are those flame tires from the Rumbler. I don't know if that's a good fit for this car. I think if I were to do this again, I would find some 20th scale ones that look like those old Indy tires they used to put on the show rods in the 70s. Because the flames are a little bit, you know, it's got the look I want, but it's not, you know what I'm saying? Flame tread, where there's no flames anywhere.
Okay, I'm going to tell you something. That's part of what knocks me out about this car.
Oh, really?
I started to look at everything on your Fokke. You know, I've seen this car before, but I really took some time to study it. And as much as I like the Uncertain T, we all grew up with it. Just design-wise, there's a certain amount of awkwardness to it that works. There are some lines in it in the styling, but they're vertical lines. And in looking at this, and especially when you get a side view, you start to see those rear tires. You've got the circular steering wheel, the circular shift knob, and the circular front wheels, and the sweep of the headers. You have all these graceful curves that are just further accentuated by the fact that it's a C cab. That big sweeping semicircle really helps everything. Then you still have the vertical, but even a little bit more subtle than the Uncertain T. You still have the vertical line, which is the windshield. This is just such a standout. In those flames, when you look at the back view, those little tiny curves of the flames go with all the other small curves that are in there. Everything ties together on this model.
Well, then,
it's gorgeous.
Wow, thank you. And now I have a new appreciation for those tires.
And to further accentuate that, from the rear view, that question mark on the back, another curve that goes into a straight line.
Well, I wish I could say I had planned all that.
It's a whole lot of design that just falls in place beautifully.
Some of the challenges, one of the biggest challenges for this was those headers, because I didn't have any headers. And I wanted it to be all uncertain T except for the independent suspension and the cab, the C cab. Again, my friend Jeff Miller, because I tried plastic, I tried modifying from the Coke machine, and it just wasn't coming out. And I ended up getting a set of uncertain T headers, just used as a model. And it was Jeff who says, get this aluminum. And so I had to hand bend all of them. And if you look in, I added the flanges, photo etch flanges, which you have to open up, which is hard to do. Jeff gave me the injector base, which I added my own stacks. Do you ever flare? Do you ever do your own flaring? What do you use for flaring tool?
I've used a mix of different things. I'm trying to think what I used originally. Probably like a Phillips head screwdriver as a kid.
Early tools.
Just kind of like wrenching it down in there.
Just grabbing it, moving it around so it opens.
And then lately I've been putting it in a lathe chuck because I know it can hold it more evenly on 3 sides or 4 sides, and compressing that with whatever tool I can find on the tailstock, and just turning it by hand. But, that's a really tough thing no matter how you do it, because you're trying to flare 8 parts and have them all look identical.
Yeah, I can see I have one that's a little wider than the rest now that you said that. It is hard, so you got to make more than one. I put a longer piece in a vise, but not too long, and I had what did I do? I ground down a soldering iron tip, and I just tap, 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 turn, tap, 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 and the bottom is compressing, making a big blob, so you cut that part off. Make more than you need. It can be a handle sometimes. Like if you're going to make a tiny piece, you leave that part on the end till you and then you cut it off. I'm telling you, these guys at the GSL, they know all the tricks. One of the things, I missed an opportunity here. It's got posable steering, which was cool. And it goes through the steering arm. But if I would have taken a little more time, I could have put that here and had the steering wheel move. But I missed that opportunity. I figured it out later. I added the Herb Deeks wheels later on. The fun part, another fun thing to do, was figuring out the seating, because I had to kick the frame up for the independent suspension. And the original Uncertain T had 2 bucket seats, and the frame actually went under the rear end with semi-elliptic leaf springs. And I'm like, well, I can't do that. And so what I did is I figured it out. I just made a bench seat, and I used it's paddy wagon, the inside of the paddy wagon. I wanted the diamond pleats, and Mark Gustafson was making an Etzel custom, and he had heated up some clear red, and he dropped it over a knife and let it turn into a 90 to soft 90. And I remembered that, and I'm like, all right. So I tried that, and it worked. I'm like, it didn't flatten out the tuck and roll diamonds or anything. It would just work, and it was a wide enough peak that I could split it in half and flip it over and have my curved seat back.
That technique is high risk. There's a lot going on there with physics that you're just, working to defy the laws of physics to get that to just come out so nice.
You get lucky. And how many paddy wagons do you have to mess up is the question before you get it right. The dash came out of the paddy wagon, the shifter's out of the pie wagon, and it's got that curve. That's why I picked it. It's got the question mark curve to it. That distributor is also a fuel pump, and you got to get your face in there. So I found it online, and I'm like, all right. And so I recreated it using little bits of K&S tubing. It came out pretty decent. I'm not unhappy with it. And if you look way in there's a question mark gas pedal.
Yes.
Just a little thing, those little fun things where I could do this. I get such a kick out of adding those extra things.
Well, you get a kick out of making it, and I get a kick out of looking at the model and then discovering it.
Yep. It's like you had said it earlier, it's a story. It's the funnest part. I love the idea of if you can make your model tell a story.